Universalism is a part of our name. And it goes back, did a little research on this because I had heard, or maybe learned incorrectly, that the church outlawed as a heresy universal salvation, which meant that in some form Jesus' ministry, portrayal, life, death, resurrection, whatever we put into that explanation, solved the problem of hell for everybody. Universal salvation is the historical derivative, or ancestor rather, of our word. Now in the last 100 years, Universalists have tried to modernize it and evolve it, or maybe even earlier than that. Hosea Ballou in 1811 wrote the Treatise on Atonement, a self-educated Rhode Island fellow who from a Huguenot background, that's where the Ballou came from, B-A-L-L-O-U. I went to his grave and to his birthplace last fall, and it was a hoot. He and William Ellery Channing at Mount Auburn Cemetery outside of Boston and Cambridge, they have life-size, bigger-than-life statues of both of them. Hosea is missing a finger. And I had a dream and an idea about a short story. What happened to Hosea's finger? William Ellery Channing is magnificent. And the two sculptures are really interesting because they didn't mean it, and it's just my conjecture, but Hosea Ballou looked real. He looked like I could talk to him. I think Channing looked sort of like a matinee star, sort of anemic, but a matinee star. So those are sort of telegraph the two cultures they come from. Now, William Ellery Channing was speaking and preaching in Federal Street Church in the 1830s. And Ballou was down near the wharf on School Street speaking to 2,000. 150, 2,000. Brahmas, the first families of Boston. Ballou, everybody on the lower strata. And some artists, and some free thinkers. And Channing would never acknowledge Ballou. He called him that unlettered preacher. I like being an unlettered preacher. He was where the people were. And I got the Treatise on Atonement last year, a copy of it. And I read that sucker. And it is very readable. You can understand it. It's regular language. But Ballou, because he didn't have a formal education, was not thought of as an appropriate, leader of a congregation by some. But he talked straight, and he talked from the heart. He did not necessarily use biblical passages. He did a lot. But he was the first Unitarian theologian. He said Jesus was less than God. Jesus was a prophet, a mentor, a guide. So I like Universalism. It has a place in my heart. And the Unitarians were cold, analytical, rich. The Universalists were a little loud, a little uncouth, where the people were. I want to read a quote from one of our great Universalist women. She was born in 1836 and died in 1905. She was the first woman in America to be honored with an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree. Her name is Augusta Jane Chafin. And her big brother was a great Universalist minister too. At the 4th Universalist Society along Central Park in New York. Well, this is what Augusta wrote. We all of us, whether rich or poor, whether high or low, of whatever nationality and religious connection, the same supreme necessities and the same great problems and an infinity of love. This world has rolled on through centuries, countless stages and phases of physical progress, until it is home of humanity, and it has, through process of evolution or growth, reached an era of intellectual and spiritual development, where there is, now she quotes Lincoln here, malice toward none and charity toward all, in whom without prejudice, without fear, and in perfect fidelity, we may clasp hands across the chasms of difference and speed and cheer others on the way of all that is good and true. That'll preach. That was her dream. That was what she saw. That's what she hoped. And over these countless centuries, when basically the tenet, the energy behind that concept of universal salvation had to do with the nature of God. God was loving. God is love, John said. And proof texting is a great phrase that we used in seminary. Proof texting means that you can go in the Bible and find anything you want, and you can preach on it. Most of our evangelical right-wing friends love the Old Testament. They love the Jewish laws of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And there was a passage that I read the other day, which I don't know how true it is. You know, Facebook is half truths and half hopes. But there was a survey done by some of the evangelical big-time ministers about the nature of the sermons, and there was a study done. The Sermon of the Mount was not found of any significance anywhere. And when asked about that by the researchers, the response was, people don't want that. They think it's weak, the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount is the heart of Jesus' ministry, the heart of his revolution. To say it's not about things, it's not about power, it's about the love, the tenderness, the understanding that we're all a part of this. That the kingdom of God, the community of faith, the kingdom of life is within us when we practice love and exercise and make justice. Universalism is a big word, and one of our ministers said years ago, said, we better get off the franchise because we're not using it. We've got to talk about the bigger picture. In the 1950s, right after World War II, and all that went on, you know this, but I like to repeat it from time to time. The two world wars in the 20th century redefined life abruptly. If you're a friend and a fan of Downton Abbey, its storyline is about the transition in Britain from the aristocracy to what came next. And by the time that Churchill was defeated by Attlee, the old conservative imperialism that was the driving energy of World War I was gone. And those Brits did something really interesting. They brought socialism into Britain. 100 years ago, they were killing people for that. Just remember your history on Ireland about their rage for independence and freedom. Okay. So here we have World War II and the promise of the League of Nations, the United Nations. The League of Nations was a promise too, but that fizzled pretty quick. They went through the motions for 20 years after World War I. But Ethiopia and Mussolini's invasion pretty well broke that up. Remember the story? Haile Selassie went to the League of Nations and begged them to come and help him because Mussolini was invading his country. Nothing happened. World War II gave the opportunity of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Rights. If you haven't read that, should be written in stone because it's beautiful. It's every idealistic concept that we, I think, aspire to as Unitarians, Universalists, and people of goodwill. It's about live and let live. Poverty is sin. We owe it to one another to bring justice and fairness to the world. Remember the Sermon on the Mount? Remember the old stories of Mama? Don't do that. You wouldn't want them to do that, would you? So we have, as Unitarian Universalists, have a legacy and a heritage that's pretty cool. It has a meaning around the nature of God, the nature of the creating spirit, the nature of the eternal energy. It's toward life. It is always toward life. Change, yes, it takes different forms. It's not a granddaddy in the sky. It's a force that moves. It's a verb. And you'll hear me say that a lot. It's a verb. God is a verb, an energy, an intention, and it's going to roll its way. And our faithfulness is to understand that energy, understand that change. I understand, I haven't seen Oppenheimer yet. And I don't want to see Oppenheimer to see the tragedy that it is. Because man's creativity, human's creativity, has made it possible to kill itself. Well, it was always sort of there, but it was in small scales, right? The next tribe will evacuate. We will evacuate. We will vanish, extinguish. The next nation, the next religion, whatever. But now we got the capacity to just blow it all up and let that creative energy, which is God, start again. So my concept of universalism, my concept of Unitarian, my concept of life is human beings have 49%. And that 51% we've got to come into relationship with. And we can impact it a little bit. We can make it work, but we're not going to control it. And we have preachers today, and we have politicians today, and we have ideologues today who say, yeah, we can. We can change it. We can fix it. It's nature. We've always had global warming. Nah. Got too many people. We got too much stuff. We created plastic. Think about that. Ooh, pre-plastic. Just think about that. What life would have been like back then. We recycled. We reused. We melted down metal objects, and we retooled them. See, we're tool makers. The brain, opposing thumb. The problem is we made hateful and destructive tools. At the same time, we can make useful and sustainable and helpful tools. There are two alternatives, Clarence Skinner said in 1948. There are two alternatives, only two before us. First, which is unlikely, is that we unscramble our modern independent culture, returning separate and isolated lives. Such a world would not demand greatness. The other alternative is to so expand our spiritual powers that we vastly increase the range of understanding and sympathy. Understanding, sympathy. Might want to add empathy, too. There is no middle way. It is greatness, universalism, or perish. What, 70 years ago, 75 years ago? Clarence came up with that. Universalist teacher at our school at Tufts. So here we are in 2024, springtime, and I've just marveled for the last 6 weeks at the ground around us driving around. Things are growing. We got strawberries down in Sparta, North Sparta. I see them on the left driving south on 15. Beautiful. It's going to come back. Mama Earth will always provide if we don't muck it up. And we're working on doing that. And there's people in hovels right now being bombed, being abused, being objectified. And it's a part of our world too. We need sympathy, we need empathy, and we need political will. And we light our candles where we can, and we do our good where we can.